Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this episode, we're going to pull out all the stops, building some terrain for Warhammer 40,000. Okay, I'll say it. I don't actually play Warhammer 40,000. Or, I guess now, also Warhammer 30,000. It's not that I don't like Games Workshop's games. I do, I really like them. In fact, I got my start as a model painter and terrain builder playing Rogue Trader back in the early 90s maybe. But when Games Workshop Canada amalgamated its division with the US, I took a break from wargaming, and also miniatures in general. It's well over a decade later now, and I'm back. But now I focus on terrain, miniature art, and I personally play World War II and Napoleonic era historicals. Despite this, I keep my eye on the 41st millennium and still follow the broad details of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Also, since my day job is as a commissioned terrain builder, I really can't go without building for clients who play the most iconic miniature games around. In fact, I recently finished a huge 10-building commission for an Age of Sigmar player, and I really enjoyed doing it. A few weeks back, I came into possession of some miscellaneous parts that are kind of a generic 40k terrain. I have no idea what brand they are, but they looked pretty decent. So I set about building a Warhammer 40,000 bunker. Please check the rest of the video out as I demonstrate my method for the build. Let's get to it. Do you need custom diorama quality terrain made for one of your projects? My contact information is in the video description. I never proceed without a plan. It may change along the way, but having the basic size and layout mapped out before you start a project is crucial. Getting out a large sheet of paper, I trace out the location of the major parts and features of the build. When I'm happy with this, I then proceed to transfer the details to a piece of cardboard, which I go ahead and cut out. I place the layer I cut out back on a fresh section of cardboard and turn it 90 degrees. Then I trace out the base again, only slightly larger. Turning it this way means that the grain of the corrugation will be at a right angle between the two layers. This adds strength. I then turn on my hot glue applicator, and when it's ready, I glue the two cardboard layers together, followed by the building piece itself. As I'm making a bunker, I then take cutoffs of pink insulation foam and glue them into place to create a sloping berm in front of the structure. When the berm is prepared, I get out a big roll of masking tape, which I use to wrap the edges of the cardboard base layers and the foam pieces of the berm itself. This smooths out the gradients between the parts and provides a layer to apply grit to later. As the saying goes,
"In the grim darkness of the future, there is only war."
So I need to add some debris and damage to make this terrain look like it is in fact in a war zone. Returning to my bits box, I come up with a bunch of miscellaneous pieces, which I then go and glue down in various places. Terrain building is equal parts science and art, so there's no specific way that I proceed to do this. I put things where they look good, and this in turn builds visual interest. Now I can get to the grit. This is done by mixing some Mod Podge with black acrylic paint and spreading it over the base. The base then gets sprinkled with a mixture of sand and kitty litter. While the glue is still wet, I now coat everything with a thin layer of rubbing alcohol. To apply this, I use a pipette. The rubbing alcohol penetrates the grit and helps the glue flow freely between the grains. Lastly, I go back to the Mod Podge mix, water it down until it flows, and apply another layer over top of everything. At this point, I leave it all to dry for about 24 hours. It's a little later, and when everything has dried and set, I grab a can of foam-safe spray paint and prime everything black. I can now get down to work painting. I start with an airbrush coat of dark brown, followed by another layer of US sand. Now I go ahead and dry brush a coat of silver gray over top of all that. This provides a pretty good highlight. I also pick out the sandbags with several layers of green. At this point, you'll notice that I've added a rough structure made from corrugated cardboard and some 3D printed girders that sits on top of the wall sections. The ground can now get some attention, so I dry brush the grit with dark brown and then follow up with a couple layers of beige and tan. I make sure I move from the darkest color to the lightest. Since this bunker is in a war zone, the structure needs some wear and tear, so I apply some gray-white to a roughly trimmed sponge and use this to dab chips onto the building's paintwork. This creates the appearance of superficial chips and damage that is right in the paint itself. With this done, I carefully paint Hull red into the middle of some of the existing chips to look like damage that extends to the metal underneath. Turning my attention to the roof, I spray it all down with a coat of rust paint. Things were now pretty well in hand, so I moved on to the small details, of which there were quite a few. First, I placed some signs I had painted freehand, just to build interest and color. Then I went on to working on the metallics. Most metal areas got a coat of bronze and a highlight of shining silver. To tone things down and to help with the contrast, I applied the occasional wash of Army Painter Strong Tone to the metal areas. The pipes and wires were next, which got painted and highlighted in a wide variety of colors, ranging from yellow to blue. I added a few chunks of insulation foam to represent rocks much earlier in the build, and these were now given a quick dry brush of a couple shades of gray. All of this work had toned down some of the contrast, so it was now time to line in and reestablish definition. I decided to use enamels for this, so I sprayed the whole model with 2 coats of satin varnish to protect my acrylics and to help the enamels flow. When the varnish had had plenty of time to dry, I took out my handy Tamiya black panel liner and applied it to the cracks, crevices, and deep recesses of the model using the applicator that comes in the bottle. At this point, the model was looking just a little too clean, so I switched to my AK Interactive weathering pencils. Applying them wet, I dabbed on some rust tones, dust, and dirt streaks, which I then blended back into the surface with a moist, flat brush. The bunker interior was just too Spartan. I decided to add some details to fix this. I started by putting up a wall map and added a small table. Since this was a battlefield bunker, it would seem rude not to have a machine gun, so I put a heavy bolter in place, and finally glued a rocket launcher to the roof, as should be required on all good bunkers. The interior was complete, so I went back to the exterior. Taking some Mod Podge, I put some random patches on the ground, to which I applied a few shades of stratic grass over top. I followed up with a couple grass tufts and some lichens. Then I went on to add some deadfall. To do this, I applied a thin layer of hairspray over the model and sprinkled oregano over the top, here and there. It's amazing how dried herbs really look like leaves and sticks in small scale. To protect my work from wear and tear, I cap things off with 2 coats of matte varnish. And with that, this project was done. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is your source for miniature, terrain building, and diorama content, and we can't do it without your support. We want to build a community to ensure that the wonderful art of building a miniature is accessible to everybody. To participate, please consider joining on Patreon. For $4 a month, our Patreon members benefit from 10% off at Joe Saunders Terrain in the Etsy store, 5% off paints and hobby supplies at Torchlight Games, free access to STL files, a mention in our credits, and early access to our videos. Please check it out and consider joining. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please remember to subscribe, press the bell button so you get immediate notification on our videos, and until next time, remember to keep building life in miniature.